Hello, I'm David Hepworth. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of chats Mark, Ellen and I have had over recent years, some between ourselves and others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you'd like to help make sure they continue, you might consider being a Patreon supporter by visiting patreon.com/wordinyour-ear, or just by liking or subscribing in whatever way you prefer. On with the show.
Welcome to another Word in Your Ear, and this about someone who The Guardian once described as arguably the greatest pop star that Britain never had. So the fact that Will Hodgkinson has written an incredibly funny and very touching book about him indicates that actually falling at the final hurdle, or indeed I suppose we could call it failure actually, is often a more gripping story than success. And the book's called Street Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. Will, it's lovely to see you again.
You too, Mark and David. Lovely to see you guys.
Great to see you. Now, the story you describe as being thwarted by bad luck and self-sabotage, and we're going to come on to that in some detail, but I have to admit that both Dave and I are kind of Lawrence agnostics, really. I mean, for some reason, Felt and Denim kind of passed us by. So I wonder if you could just give us a very quick recap on both the groups, because each obviously indicate just what an extraordinary and ramshackle character Lawrence is. You know, am I right in thinking that Felt's ambitions were quite low? It was kind of John Peel show, Enemy cover. That's pretty much the ceiling that they were aiming for. Would that be right?
Yeah, you've got it. Essentially what happened was Lawrence came from a very working class background in Birmingham. As a kid, he saw television on the cover of the NME when he was fairly young. And it struck him, the image struck him first before he heard the music. And that was his discovery that there's a whole different world away from Top of the Pops. That there's this world of underground music, of Lou Reed, the Velvet Underground, and you could exist in this world, and the goal was to be played on John Peel and to be in the NME, and that would give you something of a career. So he formed Felt in 1980. He had this idea that it was going to be an art band, very, very curated. Every last bit was going to be thought out, from the shoes they wore to the haircuts. Of course, it went wrong from the start because musicians are chaotic individuals, and Lawrence is a sort of fastidious individual, but also somebody who can't live up to his own ideals. So they did release 10 albums in 10 years, which was always his plan. There's some very good music. It's very tasteful. It's very, I guess, indie, you'd call it. It's kind of dreamlike. There's a brilliant song called Primitive Painters, which I'd recommend as a starting point for Felt. It's got Liz Fraser from the Cocktail Twins singing on it. When that finished, he reinvented himself with Denim. And the idea with Denim was a nostalgia for the 1970s.
But did it finish, just to get back to Felt for a sec, it finished with, there was a sort of two moments at the end that struck me in the book. One is that they were guaranteed the cover of the NME. And then, I mean, not that these things matter, but if that's your main ambition. And then somehow that was exchanged at the last minute for a thing about teen suicide or something. Was that right? So that was well, there's an irony. So there was a blow.
For a more commercial idea.
For a more commercial idea, that's right. And secondly, that he acknowledged that his label mates, Oasis, just had a lot more commercial flair, and he realised that they ought to. Felt never made any videos, did they? I don't think.
There were a million rules. I mean, this is the thing about Lawrence. What I've quickly discovered, we'll get onto this later, but he's obsessed with rules, and he is a self-limiting individual. So, it was always, okay, we're an art band. We don't make videos. We do interviews, but we only say certain things. We don't do this. We don't do that. It was all about these endless rules, which actually just limited everything. I mean, I remember him saying, but at the same time, he's always dreaming of fame. So he would say things like, the idea with Felt was that we were going to be in the shadows. You could only just see, you could see him, but you can't talk to him. The fans are going to be kept at a distance. He'd say things like, for example, I would never appear on the 6 o'clock news. Not that they ever asked me. But, I never got the chance to put it to the test.
I will refuse to do it, yes.
He's the
I'll
kind
turn down a knighthood.
Yeah, he would absolutely love to be asked to go on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, and then turn it down. Do you know what I mean? Maybe Billy Childish is a slightly similar individual, telling me, very excitedly that he'd been asked to do one of those, terrible shows, and it's like, well, why are you telling me? You know what I mean? He was pleased to have been asked. So Lawrence fits into that category. He was he wanted fame, he wanted success, but at the same time, he wanted it on his terms, which were basically, not possible to combine. So yeah, Felt was So that's the kind of person.
So the end of, just to recap, so the end of Felt, he kind of acknowledged that maybe they should have been more commercial, maybe they should have made videos and done all the things that Oasis had done. He formed Denim, and I remember Denim getting a huge amount of support in the press at the time. And a lot of the book has details about him, it being a real attempt to kind of get attention, really. Denim, he wrote a song, I think, called Glue and Smack, didn't he, to try and kind of be controversial. He wrote a song that mentions Mickey from Lush in it, hoping that Mickey from Lush would say something about it in the press, and she doesn't even notice. So, I mean, it did seem a bit desperate, didn't it?
Very desperate. He was desperate for attention. But Denim were very good. The thing about Denim is that they were really Britpop before Britpop happened. They had all the same ideas. I mean, It was irony, it was nostalgia, it was slightly more laddish, but not in a straightforward laddish way. It was all like Adidas tops and brightly coloured, like bucket hats and all the kind of things that Britpop then became. But this was the early 90s. And he made a lot of mistakes. I mean, for example, he said, right, Denim, he was in New York. Briefly, he went to New York at the end of Felt. And he was getting copies of The Enemy, and he decided that bands were dead, and it was all about dance music now. And so you're a singer, but you don't have a band, you don't play gigs, you do it all with backing tracks or whatever. And then he was, when he came up with this idea that bands are dead, the Stone Roses became the biggest band in the country. So he was like completely wrong. He got it he couldn't have got it more wrong. Dance music was probably even tailing off around then, and it was because you'd had that whole acid house boom, and bands were actually coming back, and that was obviously what then led to Britpop. So yeah, it was always the thing about Lawrence. It's always this strange tension between being self-limiting and, wanting everything on this kind of controlled level, but at the same time wanting to throw himself out into the world and be famous, where you can't have both. And that's what every single truly successful artist realizes. Jarvis Cocker realized that. If you go higher, David Bowie, they all realize that. They understand there's only so many things you can control. And Lawrence kind of can't let things go. I would say he's very OCD. And this is from personal experience, of spending a year with him.
The end of Denim, and it obviously was a significant thing, is they put out a record. They're putting out a record called Summer Smash. Was that right? And the record company believed this was going to be a hit. He believed it was going to be a hit. And everyone told him this was the moment. And then this being, I suppose, August 1977, whatever, and Lady Diana died. The Princess Di died. So the record was then cancelled. Is that right?
Yeah, it was even worse than cancelled. It was the only single in the history of EMI that was ever not just cancelled, but every last copy melted down.
It was melted down, that's right.
Yeah, so because it was Summer Smash, and this was an example of Lawrence's terrible luck, So I think luck does come into it a lot. You often hear about some chance thing that makes somebody get onto the real fame ladder, and then they can, if they've got talent, they can fly. And Lawrence did have a lot of bad luck, but he's also he gets very depressive and he gets very downhearted by things. And so the Lady Di incident, which basically put paid to Denim, started a very, very long decline, which ended really badly. I mean, this is all documented in the book. I mean, he became a heroin addict. He became homeless. He hit rock bottom. This was quite a while ago now. He's better now, but he really, really hit rock bottom. And every sort of paranoia about why things couldn't work out, or why the world was against him. It's almost like it all came true. So yes, he went from Denim was a big band, or potentially a big band. They had a lot of good press. They were signed to EMI. It was all going to happen. So I think to be promised all of that and then for it all to fall apart, and then EMI completely lost interest, was devastating for him.
But why do you feel so strong? Because you said, I think, in the book that he was England's greatest lost musical genius. You know, I just wondered if this was partly. I'm sure you're absolutely right, but there is a kind of romantic attachment that we have, isn't there, to failure, to kind of Nick Drake, Rocky Erickson, Big Star, or whatever. People underachievers. Is there some element of that?
No, definitely. But you've mentioned a handful of my favourite people, so, you know.
Well, there we are. No, we're all the same. You love them, you know.
I mean, I'm wearing a Forever Changes T-shirt. That album was
there you go.
Another one. Really good example.
Yeah.
Another one.
But that album's a masterpiece and it didn't get anywhere. So it shows that, you know, it isn't just down to pure talent will get you somewhere. So, no, I think Lawrence is incredibly talented, but I now know why it's not just bad luck. It really isn't. It's a lot of it, and he won't admit this, and I've had arguments with him about this. A lot of it is the thing that is like, what I could have been. So if you keep it in your imagination, and I think he's kind of got a childlike Peter Pan quality where everything is kept as a fantasy, then it could always have been amazing. You know, if you actually become successful, that's a whole different problem to deal with. But if you don't become successful, you can kind of keep it as this kind of beautiful dream that never happened.
Absolutely.
And that's his case. That's definitely...
Because you say in the book, again, that nothing is ever his fault. He will never acknowledge that anything he does it goes wrong because of him. It's always something else.
I could give you lots of personal examples. The book is not a memoir. I'm not ghostwriting it. I'm spending a year with him, and it's an observation. You know, so I'm observing someone who doesn't fit in with the world and how they interact with the world and how the world interacts with them. And so, you know, I'd have to arrange to meet him. And it's very easy because he lives in a flat in central London, and I would meet him in the coffee shop downstairs. There were times when he just didn't turn up and the whole thing was arranged. And then it was like, you should have called me before. It's like, I did call you. You meant to send me a text the night before? And it's like, yes, I sent you a text the night before. I overslept. It wasn't my fault. There was some kids playing in the street. You know, it's never his fault. Never his fault. And that goes for everything. It's like, why does it always happen to me? Why do I have such bad luck? All of this stuff. Nothing is ever Lawrence's fault. And I think that's a childlike thing too, because that's not taking responsibility. You know, I spoke to some old girlfriends of his. He hasn't had a girlfriend in 25 years, but, you know, in the 90s he had some. He, you know, they said the same thing. I mean, Michaela was amazing. She was his girlfriend in the Denim eras, and she's had a brilliant line. She said to me, I used to look at him and say, do you know what? You are a real idiot. If you stop so hard trying to be the star that you also don't want to be, you might actually get somewhere. I thought that summed it up.
Yeah. So how? Let's the time scheme. How old is he now?
62.
Wow.
So that's the thing that intrigues me about him and the relationship between him and music and indie music and so forth. Is that means he spent more than 40 years trying to be a star and hasn't stopped. You know, where if he'd have pursued any other career, he would have thought, this is not going right. I'll go and do something else. It doesn't, you know, the whole point of indie is not to be a success, isn't it? That's the central dream of indie.
Well,
you keep going not being a success?
Yes, I think there's an element of that, but there's also a deeper problem here for me. I think it goes deeper. I think that with Lawrence, he sort of sees himself as on a holy mission. Now, I think he's someone who couldn't lead a normal life. You know, I think there's quite a lot of serious, you know, some psychological issues there. He doesn't eat. He doesn't have relationships. I think what the book is to me really about is someone who sacrificed everything. One of his favourite books is Hunger by Knut Hamsun. Now that's about an artist who is so dedicated to being an artist and writer that he ends up kind of chewing his own finger and eating paper rather than get a job. He could have got a job, but he doesn't. That's Lawrence. Lawrence could have got a job. There was a time in the 90s when all of those indie people, you know, Pete Astor from The Loft, Bobby Gillespie, you know, they'd either been successful and they had careers and they understood what went with it, or they'd moved on and they've got jobs as university lecturers, or and he never, ever, ever did. So to me, it was like he took on a sort of almost monastic mission. Yeah. You know, he said, right, I'm going to sacrifice family, relationships, mental health, physical health, pretty much everything for this pursuit of what? Was it art, fame, pop music? I think it's it is a sort of strange holy mission.
It's quasi-religious, isn't it? There's an interesting book. What's the name of the woman who wrote it? Wendy something, called Empire of Dirt. Have you ever read that?
I've heard of it.
She's an American academic. She's done a huge study of indie culture, and her whole point about indie culture is Puritan. It's self-denial. I will eventually go to the top of a mountain and be on my own, where I can be pure, where I can be untouched by things. Whereas being a success in pop music means you're touched by absolutely everything. And you have to, it's compromises absolutely all day,
all
every
your
day.
Ideals are compromised.
Of course they are. That's what you have to do.
That's what you have to do. I mean, I saw Dua Lipa at Glastonbury, and it was okay, but it was as compromised as it could possibly get, and it was just absolute people-pleasing. And so were Coldplay, pure people-pleasing. Well, that's fine. That's what they've decided to do. Now, the thing about Lawrence is that this is where the complexities come. He'll tell you that he hates indie music. He says it's lily-livered music for puny weaklings, which is, might be
it's rich coming from him.
I was going to say, I mean, a gust of wind might blow him over. But he, in his mind, it's that thing. It's that you hit the nail on the head. It's this idea of purity, but at the same time, he'll say he wants to be the biggest star in the world, but on his terms. He's always going on about the fans. We'd have arguments about the book where he'd say, well, the fans wouldn't like it. It's like, what fans? It's technical. What are you talking about?
Fans.
Always go about the fans.
You get the impression that most of his fans are actually rock critics because of his ideals. Really.
So how did you respond to the idea that you were going to write a book about him? Was he thrilled about this?
No, incredibly difficult. I tell you, so I've known Lawrence for 20 odd years. I find the first reason why, some might say, why did you write a book about him? And especially someone who's not known. Like I said, it's a book about, to me, it's a book about sacrifice and the price of a dream. But also I wanted to write a book about him because he's eternally fascinating, very annoying, incredibly difficult. He's driven me absolutely insane, but fascinating. You never know which way his mind's going to go and what he's going to say. So that is kind of at the heart of it. And I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, how did you respond to the idea that you were writing a book about it?
Sorry.
Didn't he make there were a lot of rules, weren't there? He said you can write a book, but you must have, I think if they were, you can't have any questions about felt, or you can't interview anybody about felt, or any members.
So I
didn't he further think that he was writing the book rather than you writing the book?
He still does. What happened was, I don't want to say, his first response on reading it was, you made me look like and think of the rudest word in the Anglo-Saxon language. That was his first response. Initially, when we started doing the book, he came up with loads of rules. I mean, a lot of them were absolutely ridiculous. And,
you weren't allowed to reveal his surname, was that right?
There was some I agreed to. So I felt that, I thought, okay, let's get the balance right here. Because he's very, very, he's got an obsession about his surname. And
why?
Because I think partly it's the idea of being a single moniker pop star like Prince, but more than that, and I don't want to reveal his surname, obviously people can find out easily enough, is that he has got a deep problem with his family. And this all comes out in the book. This is the way Lawrence's mind works. He will, whatever big, deep psychological issues there are, he will deal with by focusing on details. I'll give you an example. He got very, very upset because there's a section in the book where I talk about the fact that he didn't go to his mother's funeral because she refused to buy Flora margarine. And she would only buy supermarket own brand margarine. And he was going, I can't believe you said that. It's so untrue. Anyway, so he got really, really upset. And I was thinking, okay, yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's his mother's funeral. Maybe I should be more respectful. And then after a moment, he went, it was Lurpak. It was Lurpak she wouldn't buy. So things like that happened all the time. So when we started doing the book, initially, we had a meeting with the publisher, Pete Selby, who's a fantastic guy. And we decided, this is where we agreed. We said it's not going to be a memoir. I'm not going to ghostwrite a book of someone no one's ever heard of, but I'd like to do a study of him. And so we agreed that it's in the spirit of books like, there's a fantastic book called The Duke in His Domain, which is a study by Truman Capote of Marlon Brando. And it's a kind of study. And then you probably know the amazing Rolling Stones book by Stanley Booth, which is, where he's trying to get Mick Jagger to sign off on agreeing, and he's going backwards and forwards to his home, and he tells the story of the Rolling Stones, but through the perspective of someone who's kind of being kept at arm's length a little bit.
Yeah, it's a very good point, actually, a really good parallel, because that's often the best vantage point of all, isn't it? Is not to be within the charm circle. Because when you're within the charm circle, you have to make the same compromises as the rest of them.
Of course you do. So, and I didn't have to make compromises because Lawrence is, he hasn't got a charm circle. No one's ever heard of him. He's, I mean, we were literally, there's a scene in the book where we're dragging a vast sack of 1 and 2p coins to the bank so that he can get about £37.50 because, he's got absolutely no money whatsoever. And things like that he didn't mind. He said, it's important for the fans to see how I live,
That interested me, that moment there, because it's a bit like one where whenever he buys a packet of cigarettes, he takes all the cigarettes out, you say, and puts them in his favourite empty packet because that's got his favourite government health warning.
That's right. He likes the one with all the rotting teeth.
The rotten, that's right, yeah. And I know, we all do. We know people like him. And they, I suppose you could call them self-mythologists. They're people who are kind of, I'm a bit of a legend. Yeah. And everything I do, I know people are going to be watching me to see whether this contributes to this notion of my mythology. I mean, I couldn't help but think that he was just making an enormous effort a lot of the time to be eccentric. Or is he genuinely unable to act in any other way? I don't know.
Okay, so the comparisons I would make, I think 3 people in music who are famously difficult, stroke talented. Kevin Rowland.
Yeah.
Kevin Shields of My Bloody Valentine.
Yeah.
And Lawrence. Now, the difference between the 3 of them, Lawrence and Kevin Rowland are very, very conscious of the image they put out into the world. They're obsessed with their clothes. They're obsessed with what they say. If you do an interview with them, they worry about the things they overthink. Kevin Shields is different. He's got the same meticulousness, and he'll drive everyone mad by endlessly tinkering with the sounds of the new My Bloody Valentine album. But he couldn't care less about what he looks like. He couldn't care less about the image he projects into the world. It's genuinely, he's just not bothered. He doesn't have that.
You're saying that Lawrence does care about what he looks like?
Massively. He's incredibly vain.
But you have all sorts of details about that. At one point he goes, I think he wears, is it Lidl brand jumpers or something?
Yes. Yeah. He goes once
with Greg's underpants, or I can't remember now. But there's various things appear, and you just think, I mean, this is just a conscious effort to kind of go the other way, isn't it? To me,
yes and no, because he's very, very conscious. He's always talking about the fans. He's always talking about the fans won't like it. So he's very aware, but at the same time, he is extremely eccentric. I mean, to the point of crazy OCD. I mean, I would say something which Michaela, again, who's the most revelatory former girlfriend and very, very clever. I mean, she thinks that, he's hardly eaten for the last 40 years. He is so thin. He's terrified of he's terrified of cheese, and these are not affectation.
How can you be terrified? How does he express that? If he's in a shop,
if you see, if he sees, I took him to Glastonbury, which was incredible. And he said, he had some great lines. I mean, I said, what did you think about it? He said, he thought it was like he thought it reminded him of Lord of the Rings. He thought it was like where the hobbits all gather and let it all hang out for their annual festival. And he said it was nice in that way, but what he couldn't bear was all the food trucks. And you see people stuffing their faces and this big fog of awful aroma of this horrible food everywhere. And he absolutely hates food. He's got a terrible fear of it. He's got a terrible fear of physical intimacy. You can't touch him. I talked to him once about, because he's always going on about his imaginary girlfriend, which he hasn't got. And he said, he hasn't
got an imaginary.
He hasn't even got an imaginary.
I'm trying to just take that on board for a second.
I mean, he's going on and on about this ideal girlfriend. He said, someone to go to gigs with me. When let's say I've got to go to this bloody award show and I don't want to go, someone to sit there with me and look good. And I'd say, what, someone to hold your hand? He went, oh no, I wouldn't go that far. He's a genuine. Do you know what I mean?
Because you talked to quite a few of the girls. One of them surely was his stalker, wasn't she? Isn't that right?
Vicky.
Yeah, I don't think we're being unkind or inaccurate to say that was the case. I mean,
I think she would say it herself. Yeah, she would say it herself. She was kind of crazy. I mean, she was great, Vicky, but Lawrence is very good looking. He's really. The lifestyle has taken its toll on him, but he was very good looking in the early 80s, the felt time. And, he had that mythology, that mysteriousness, which can be very attractive. She was a fan of felt. She went to one of his gigs. I mean, she was, sort of like attracts like. She came to a felt gig with a load of fireworks stuffed in her bag. She was planning to let them off as a way of getting his attention. Now, I don't think letting off fireworks, even in the 1980s, in small venues, is something that was encouraged.
No.
I don't think she actually did it. But that was her way of trying to get his attention. So she was very, very interesting. And she would say things like, I mean, the thing is there's quite a lot of intimate detail in the book, which I'm very surprised he didn't complain about. But, she would say, well, he never touched my breasts. I mean, he's never, his idea of intimacy was her in one corner of the room and him in the other, and slowly them taking their clothes off. I mean, that was as far as it went.
Didn't he say, that's because I'm saving myself for Kate Moss or something? I can't remember.
Natasha Kinski. I got that wrong. I had to change it.
Oh, yeah. Right, okay.
He's got that kind of stuff. Man, Kate Moss, I didn't fancy Kate Moss then. It was Natasha Kinski. What are you talking about? You're mad. So I love
the idea that the index page is full of fantasy people. People that didn't exist, just thoughts that went through his head.
Oh, God. Well, the Kate Moss thing, I mean, so going on and on and on about her. And Bobby Gillespie, who's a friend of his, he kind of moves in those circles. And at one point, he said, OK, fine, look, I'll introduce you to Kate Moss. Now, of course, Lawrence ran a mile. He didn't want to meet her. He wanted to keep her in this imaginary fantasy figure. Yeah. It's Peter Pan, I think. I think
all of it is consistent with that idea you said that if you don't actually try and do something, then you can always dream that it would have happened.
That's exactly
and
what
you didn't in any way wreck this particular illusion by trying it and failing. Does he acknowledge, though, that I mean, I felt unkind at the beginning of this, describing it as a bit of a failure, but it's certainly, as I said, falling at the final hurdle every time, isn't it? But does he acknowledge that he hasn't been that successful?
I don't know, because he's always talking about the fans, and then at the same time he'll go on about his poverty, and it's very hard to say. He denies being a self-saboteur, but everyone says he is, and Terry Miles, who does a lot of his band is Mozart Estate now. And they do a kind of brilliantly sort of lacerating lyrics about modern life, set to kind of chirpy novelty pop. Not very successful, but I think amazing and really, really good. Anyway, Terry Miles does a lot of those chirpy melodies. And he said, I think that Lawrence wants to be a success once he's dead. In his mind, imagining this perfect image, like, I don't know. I mean, not even Syd Barrett, because Syd Barrett continued living after he disappeared. But, someone who died young and then their legacy was discovered. Nick Drake.
This is an interesting thing because, I mean, this applies at this moment in time far more than it ever used to apply 30 years ago, whatever. The people are even less successful people, i.e. people who didn't have chart records or whatever, are famous on a certain level for far longer nowadays. Nobody disappears anymore. Thanks to streaming and YouTube and God knows what. And you are writing a book, which we are talking about a person that most people will never have heard anything by at all. But it's a kind of fame, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, it is. But also, I didn't. My goal for this book is, I don't think it's about Lawrence, but in a way, it's not about Lawrence. What I think it's really about, like I said, is someone who can't. What happens if the world doesn't work with you? You know what I mean? I kind of think that's what it's about. I mean, someone said that actually John Niven, who wrote Kill Your Friend, he said it's about, to him, it was about what would have happened to someone like Morrissey if Morrissey had never been successful.
Absolutely.
Someone who's very difficult, very talented, but kind of embittered and kind of can't really deal with the world.
Yeah.
So what happens? And, I think it can be applied to a lot of people. What I would say about Lawrence is that I know a lot of people who, especially the kind of people you meet in nightclubs in your 20s, who sort of saw themselves as stars, but they never really did anything. They didn't write books. They didn't, they didn't make records. They didn't become artists, but they always talking about it. Now, Lawrence has made records. He has, he's produced a hell of a lot. He made 10 records with Felt, 3 with Denim, 5 or 6 with Go-Kart Mozart and Mozart Estate, which is a sort of continuation. He does do gigs, and the gigs are really great. So it's not that he doesn't do stuff. He does produce things, and he produces brilliant things, but he's so self-limiting, and I think that if... this is book he's very nervous about. I know he is, which is why he's being so interfering, because the book is getting a really good reaction. Now, I can't tell you how well it's going to do, but suddenly he's going to get exposure.
This is it.
Exactly. Is he going to help you in any way promote this book?
He's freaking out.
Surely that's better. Him freaking out and not promoting it.
It's what you want, Will.
It's what you want. I mean, for him to promote it and go, yeah, great.
The last thing you want him is signing copies in Waterstones.
No, you don't. You want him sitting in the corner, kind of,
Ideally, you want him to injunct the book.
Well, I don't think I want that. I wish you hadn't said that, because
he won't. He can't afford it.
There's been so many threats, David. It's been. All I can say is think about your most difficult interview that you've ever done, and the end result is great, but the stress is unbelievable. Right. Let's say, or you do a book and someone sues you or whatever. When things are really, really hard, but also the reward is kind of greater. That's what it feels like. I mean, it's ongoing. It hasn't finished. He's still trying to insist, and there's no reason why he should, because it's not his book, which he doesn't seem to understand, but he's trying to insist on some matte finish for the cover that went out of production in 1964, and this is based on a book that he likes the look of. It's always these little details. He's obsessed. I mean, the amount
that would make any difference at all.
Oh my God, but he's obsessed. And the change that we had a 2-hour argument. He's obsessed with the Hasidic Jewish community in North London. He really admires their sort of sense of order. Anyway, so the first chapter is us going around Golders Green, and there's a bit where I describe him he wanted one of the hats that the Hasidic Jewish men wear, and he went up to one. He said he went up to them one point to try and make friends. He went, "Gentlemen, hello." And they all ignored me. What do you think?
What did you expect to say? God, it's Lawrence from Felt.
Exactly. Please, come, exactly. Can you celebrate Passover with us? I mean, just ridiculous. But I
thought there was a lovely detail when he said that he talked to Bobby Gillespie, and Bobby Gillespie had written that book. Was it Tenement Kid? I think it's done quite well. Yeah. Bobby Gillespie said, I made quite a bit of money out of it. And he was saying, it's great, because I've now realised I'm going to make some money out of my book. And then you say to him, you're not making any money out of this. You've got nothing to do with it. You're simply the subject of the book. So his level of misunderstanding is astonishing.
Oh, it's unbelievable. But he really does think it's his book, unless I haven't done what he wants, in which case it's a big problem. So there's lots and lots of that. I mean, I let him read it, which I felt that I had to, because he'd given up so much of his time. And, it's so much. It's not like he's just in a little bit. It's about this figure. And so, I mean, but all the... after our massive argument, where we really almost fell out, he calmed down. Some other people told him it's great. Bobby Gillespie, who he looks up to, called him and said, back off, leave Will alone, this is really good. And there's, Bobby likes it. Bobby thinks it's good. So then all of a sudden everything changed. Yeah, it's a masterpiece that I wrote, that kind of thing. So we had a lot of that, but the endless battle. So the one I was going to say about so he wanted to get one of those hats, and he went to a shop to get his head fitted. He couldn't get one in the end because it didn't do they only did them in black, and he wanted off black grey or something. Typical Lawrence. Anyway, he's going, my credibility will be blown. You said the shop's in Golders Green. I was like, where is he? He said, Stamford Hill. And I was like, I'm not doing it. It was literally these tiny little things which he's going, his credibility will be blown. Among who? The Hasidic Jewish community? I mean, are they going to be reading the book? I mean, it's just crazy. So it's tiny details which he obsessed over.
Will there be a point when you think some people might see him in the same terms as a kind of Syd Barrett and Nick Drake and the people we've been talking about, and then Arthur Lee, these kind of things?
So I think there are some incredibly beautiful. So let's go through those people. Forever Changes is a perfect album to me. Nick Drake, very, very complex music, very beautiful, incredible depth and melody. And Syd Barrett, just fantastic. Those two Syd Barrett albums, which I absolutely love, Just Another World, a kind of I don't know, like a sort of childlike Victoriana world or something. Has Lawrence done that? I would say collectively he has, but I don't know if I could ever point anyone to one single record. Do you know what I mean?
You see, that's an interesting thing because, it's the number of records made is quite remarkable. It's not even Syd Barrett, 2 solo records made within a year of each other, something like that, and then that's it, kind of thing. People can focus on that, can't they? Because it feels like Nick Drake did 3 years or whatever, 3 records, the end. Whereas if somebody does something, spreads themselves so thin, you don't get that cult around one particular thing, do you?
I don't think so, but then we are in a different age as well.
Yeah, we are. Absolutely.
I mean, so I went to a gig in Ramsgate, a Lawrence gig, a Mozart Estate gig. It was tiny, but it was full. It was only 100 people or whatever. There was a young guy, who'd come over from America to be there. Really? And I got chatting to him and said, why are you here? And he said, I was rooting around on Spotify. And, the algorithm directs you to certain things. I think he was listening to the Stone Roses or something, Right, and he started hearing Felt. And he said, I never heard such beautiful, mysterious music. And then he discovered the other stuff. So, I think within that body of work, which is very, very different, very different in tone and quality and all the rest of it, there's some amazing music, some really amazing music. But I think Lawrence is probably more of ultimately a lyricist. I think that's really where his talents lie. And he's also somebody who can't do it on his own. He's always needed people around him. Nick Drake could tell everyone, he was such an incredible musician. It was kind of, everyone else can just kind of fit into that vision. Lawrence is slightly different. He needs people like Terry Miles, or there's an amazing guitarist in Felt called Maurice D-Bank. But the other problem is he falls out with everyone because he's so specific and difficult and makes everyone tries to tell them what to wear or what to do. Felt was meant to be a non-drinking band. No one was allowed to drink. Well, what do 20-something Brums do when they go out on tour? They get completely pissed. The first night in Belgium, he said that they got drunk on the ferry and it was a disaster. You imagine them going round to all the galleries and admiring the art and looking moody and mysterious. He didn't think they're going to just get pissed in the pub.
Well, it's a terrific book, and I'm trying to describe it to my wife, and she was saying, well, what's it about? I said, well, mostly it's about Will Hodgkinson wandering around for a year around the streets of London with this kind of ultimately unsuccessful pop star, drinking kind of styrofoam cups of tea, and wearing terrible clothes, and the adventures they don't have,
He sold it.
And she says it sounds absolutely thrilling, but I have to say it is completely brilliant. It's really unusual and original and extraordinary. And I think it tells you, as you were saying earlier, there's something very significant about the nature of fame and the nature of the pursuit of fame. And it's fantastic. And it's called
Street
Level Superstar, A Year with Lawrence. Thanks so much, Will.